Well, that's certainly a very lovely song and sounded very nice, all of us singing that together. 2 weeks ago in the sermon, I covered the 8th commandment. I mentioned it's probably a good idea, at least periodically, to take one of the commandments of God. I mentioned that all of the law is built upon loving God and loving your neighbor, and the 10 commandments are the foundational principles by which we should govern our lives and is the basis of the spiritual or the moral law of God. So we took a brief look at the 8th commandment and explored that a little bit. At the time when I gave the sermon, I said, well, I probably should have done the 7th commandment with all that was in the news about this sexual misconduct and everything that had preceded that particular week. And I'm glad we can see that all of that has died down and is no longer a part of the news or anything anybody's concerned with. Well, actually, because of that, I kind of decided to construct a sermon around this contemporary or basic things that are happening in the news all around, especially this particular week. Obviously, a new round of revelations had come out this past week. TV personalities, politicians, actors, the whole nation kind of wonder, well, who's not involved in some of this in one way or the other? It has to be a very damaging image, unfortunately, for our country and for the U.S. around the world as people view all of this taking place that we've seen in the news, which including alarming rate of teachers and coaches and running off with students or having a relationship with them, and it seems like it's never ending, as all of you know from the news. So what is going on? And maybe a better question is, well, where do we begin to try to sort out some of that and understand it as we should view it as God's people? I think we know that more and more society is really upside down, inside out with its values without an anchor as far as shared values we all kind of agree on and insist on as in the past based on the Bible or biblical principles, at least fundamentally. We don't have that in the same way anymore. That we would say it gets to the very heart of the difficulty. But anymore, we don't seem to know which bathroom to go into or to whom to marry, and a host of other questions. In London, this is just came out, a prominent Anglican cleric and gay rights campaigner known for contentious gestures has urged believers to pray for Prince George. That's that little 4-year-old, kind of cherub-looking, if you've seen that little blonde-hair boy, to pray for Prince George, age 4, and third in line to the throne. We're going to pray that he find the love of a young gentleman when he grows up so as to advance the cause of same-sex marriage in the church. Wonderful advice there to pray for that. And that's sort of the conditions that we're in, and pray that he doesn't have the same kind of relationship and have a biological a child like which produced him. Pray that he have a different kind of relationship, and he's a cleric in the church, and I guess nobody particularly shocked anymore by that or many other things. Look at Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 5. Isaiah 1 verse 5. My sermon today is not totally a commentary on our condition today morally or even with respect to this particular topic. At least for a period of time, we'll look at a few things. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. Why would you be stricken anymore? God asks that question of his people, his nation. You will revolt more and more. He said, the whole head is sick. The whole heart is faint, from the sole of the foot even unto the head. There's no soundness in it. It's systemic. There's not one problem. If you're trying to solve a problem like we're discussing, it's not a matter where you point to this one thing and that take care of it all. Well, we'll just get the schools straightened out and everything will be fine. Well, no, we'll just get the entertainment in. And so, well, you just get the leader. It's multifaceted. And that's what he said about here in Isaiah. It's from the head to the foot. It's throughout is the problem and the difficulty. There's no one problem. many contributing factors, but we would all say that morality is at the foundation or the basis. Although there are other societal matters and issues that obviously need to be addressed and taught, but it comes down to a moral conviction and foundation, and that seems to be the problem I think we would all recognize as well. So the seventh commandment, Exodus chapter 20, Exodus 20 verse 14. Is the seventh commandment. We covered stealing a couple of weeks ago. Now here the seventh, Exodus 20:14, simply said, "You shall not commit adultery." But as we saw last time, the principle covers the entire range of male-female interaction and behavior in principle. Very succinctly stated. In other words, it establishes norms and values and parameters and right and wrong. It's stated very succinctly in the seventh commandment, but it's the entire range that we understand based on other scriptures and expounding this particular broad principle. We're all sexual beings. God created us that way. We're biologically male or female, and in a sense it wouldn't matter what you called yourself or how you felt. Biologically, you're identified as male or female, and that really can't change. God created man and male and female that way. And we, of course, believe in God being the creator. Societies down through history have drifted to one extreme or another in regulating and in trying to have a societal norm as to what's proper, what isn't, what do you allow, what do you don't, what's acceptable, what is not acceptable. And we go from one kind of extremes. You see that throughout history. Ancient Corinth was noted for a very promiscuous lifestyle. Even a term you say, you're Corinthianizing, because that's what was a part of their society. It was even part of the religion. You went to the temple and participated in sexual relations with the priest and the priestesses and the clergy. That was a part of worshiping. So that was ancient Corinth. And we had members living in Corinth. Obviously, Paul writing to the church, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and giving warnings about that as well. Well, there's one extreme. Then you can have certain Islamic cultures that are very, very strict, certainly having to do with the female and their role and even the dress and the relationship and what they're allowed to do, way on the other side of what would have been ancient Corinth or even other places in the world today as well. Well, God is not a prude. He's the one that inspired the Song of Solomon. Very expressive there, a man and his wife. God isn't a prude. His way is not that of the Victorian age. That isn't what God stands for or promotes, at least in every way, when at that time people were very uninformed about biological matters. Very, very hush-hush about things that God created. So very uninformed and emotionally frigid about sexual matters. Very repressed that way. Many people in the Victorian age. Of course, then you swung out of that. Went back to another extreme. We're certainly not in the Victorian age now. I don't think anybody would mistake us for, yeah, that's us. Hardly that, by any means. Unfortunately, America peddles a great deal of the opposite all around the world, in music and entertainment and all various printed material, and we produce most of that. And no wonder some people really are fearful of our culture and what it does to society, and rightfully so, at least in that respect. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, Genesis 2:24. Because of what we see around us, and obviously what's been in the news, we need, as God's people, to touch on this subject from time to time, rehearse it. Can't cover everything by any means. But Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife. They shall be one flesh." Doesn't say that they would be married and just have children, although that's certainly a part of what they would do, Adam and Eve, especially replenishing the world, but they would be one flesh. That one flesh is a part of the marriage union, whether children come along or not. That's the way it's written. They become one flesh in marriage. It doesn't say they become one flesh just to have children. It doesn't say that a boy will meet a girl and they'll become one flesh after they've dated a couple times. It doesn't say that either in the context of marriage and male and female. And becoming one flesh is a part of that relationship. It's built in that way. God created it that way, said it was very good and right. So sexuality is a fundamental aspect of life. Fundamental basis of our lives, whether male or female. We're designed to be attracted to each other. God created that. We're designed to sort of long for a partner, long for someone to have a relationship with and go through life together, whether male or female. We're designed that way. We're attracted to that. We don't particularly enjoy or just choose to be alone. Well, sometimes that's happens and is required. But we're attracted to each other, attracted in different ways. So are we as human beings, are we to follow animal instinct? Or are we on a higher plane and we're directed by matters of character? Still human, still have our needs, our drives, our attraction to the opposite sex, all of that's true. But are we guided by just instinct, so a kind of animal impulse? Or would God have us to be on a higher plane and we're directed by matters of character? Obviously, we would say it's a matter of character. Ideally, a society would support, help protect, and encourage right behavior that would reflect what God had in mind. Unfortunately, more and more society is due opposite of that. More or less follow your impulses. So indeed, we see that more and more. Verse 25, we're still in Genesis, the second chapter. Verse 25 said they were both naked, and they thought, so what? They didn't even know what naked meant. They were just people. God created, oh, you're a female, you're a man. They didn't know what's naked mean. They didn't even know what that meant. Why would they? Would they care? They were both naked, the man and his wife. They weren't ashamed, didn't think anything of it. Well, in Genesis 3 and verse 6, the woman saw that the tree was good for food. We're going through this in the Wednesday night Bible study, and Mr. Ralph Levy's covering the book of Genesis. The woman saw the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. She took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave it unto her husband with her, and he ate. And she was the one that was more tricked. According to Timothy, the woman was more tricked and deceived, talked into this being for her benefit. Adam, it seemed like he was afraid not to go along or had some other motive and was not quite as deceived as Eve. Eve maybe said, well, this is great. This is just what we need to be like God. Adam, I don't think so, but did it anyway. Something along those lines. At least Timothy points out a distinction as to the choices of Adam and Eve. Well, the eyes of them both were open, and lo and behold, all of a sudden they discover they're naked. And good God come, who told you that? Where'd you get that idea? I never taught you the word naked. Why are you thinking about that? Well, obviously, something had changed. Hard to define exactly what was taking place, or we don't know what Satan told both of them. But there was a sense of shame, a sense of covering. In other words, a person's deepest sense of himself or herself has to do with with gender and who they are, male or female, as an identity. Ideally, we project that. We try to have our boys project being boys, eventually being men. Ladies identifying with more feminine, the female side. We teach them that. That's right and good. We identify ourselves. And now society's getting that very mixed up. Almost feeling like it's wrong to identify yourself as one or the other. Well, these are very powerful forces in our lives. I think we all know that. At least the adults know that. Very powerful forces in our lives, and they shouldn't be awakened prematurely or improperly. Shouldn't be awakened prematurely or improperly, and they're against society pushing younger children, younger boys, and into that context of the sexual side, the male and the female, before they should be, need to be. So we have to obviously exercise precaution in that area. Intimacy does have a powerful impact on us as human beings. It just does. That's why sexual abuse is very damaging. Be very, very difficult to deal with and to cope with. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Proverbs 4:23. Book of Proverbs, of course, giving good advice to young people. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all diligence." Watch what you set your heart on, and that would certainly apply to falling in love and infatuations and attractions that are natural. But keep your heart with all diligence. Out of it are the issues of life. It's right to the heart and the core of what we are. Powerful, very strong motivation, and how it affects our thinking if we think we love somebody, we found somebody. Now, that can all be fine and right at the right time. But if it's too young, if we're falling in love before we're mature enough to use judgment, good judgment, then we don't use good judgment. Or if we're in a set of circumstances where we're being aroused in that way, we're just almost incapable of making a good choice, because that's how strong all of that can be. So there's a time of protection and a timing, none of which our society is helping. Very little help, whether it's schools or anywhere else, or certainly the popular entertainment and music and magazine, and not a help at all that I can see, not much, to help guide young people so the choices are healthy and good, that they're not regretting. Well, ancient Israel was intended to be a healthy society in every respect. They were intended to be a healthy society that other people look at Israel and kind of marvel. What guides you people? Well, what's at the basis? It said that in Deuteronomy 8, I think it is. Well, what is it? What is it about you people? You have such judgments and values and laws that make you so different. And that's what they were to be in every aspect of society, including male and female relationships. There were laws that protected that distinction. Those were important. Let's read a few of them. Exodus 22:19. Exodus 22:19. Exodus 22:19, you'd almost, would you really have to say something like this? Remind anybody, whosoever lies with a beast shall surely be put to death. We're not animals. That was not permitted in ancient Israel. I suppose many, well, you're a consenting adult and a consenting animal. What are you going to do? Why would you say anything about it? God said that practice is not going to take place. That would have probably been in certain pagan communities and societies. You just don't do that. Not proper. We're in the image of God. Well, Leviticus 18:22 again gets into the right issues of gender. Leviticus 18:22, you shall not lie with mankind as with womankind. That isn't what's permitted in Israel. In Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, the woman shall not wear that which pertains unto a man. These would be items which are clearly, distinctly for one or the other, male or female. It doesn't mean that there can't be a right kind of pants or something that a woman wear because men wear them. This is something that everybody recognizes, well, that's what men only wear, or this is only what women wear. Clear distinction. Woman shall not wear that which pertains to a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do this are an abomination. You're confusing the genders. The children are confused. The little boys, the little girls, they get confused about it. God said, the right distinction. Both are right and good, male and female. God created them, said that it was good. We're not confusing all of this. So the cross-dressing, that wasn't done in Israel. Somebody showed up and something obviously looked like what men wear or women wear, then that they had to deal with that. Otherwise, society gets upside down, as I said, and confused and distorted about gender, basic element of life. Well, there's really a twofold problem in trying to distill this down. A basic, at least I've listed, a twofold problem. One is the removing of moral and spiritual values that a society would share and recognize, kind of a dissolving and a dispersing of those values, and then a promotion of sexuality. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13 brings out kind of this 1-2 punch, so to speak, not specifically in this context, but the same idea. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13, for my people have committed two evils. He said, they not only have forsaken me, the fountain of living water. Okay, they don't want anything to do with me. Okay, they go their separate way. That's their choice, I guess. But they've not only decided to reject me, but they've hewn out broken cisterns that can hold no water. They've come up with their own substitution, which makes the matter worse. And that's kind of the 1-2, and we're not only getting rid of moral value, we're promoting something alternative. Matter of fact, if you don't buy into that, what's the matter with you? Something wrong with you if you don't share that. Well, another factor I'll just throw in here, I think, comes into play with some of the more elite in our society, and I'll just call that the kind of maybe the arrogance factor. You think you rise above everybody else. You're privileged in some way. I guess some think they'll never get caught, or nobody will ever say anything, or you just get to such a position in society that you kind of feel like you're above the others. I don't know. Makes you wonder about some of the choices people make, but you kind of get beyond where you think you're not the same as everybody else. You've kind of made it in life. One of the elite. I don't know. It seems that way. Isaiah 13 and verse 11. Isaiah 13 and verse 11. That's a common human trait. Isaiah 13:11. I will punish the world for their evil and the wicked for their iniquity, and I'll cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease. Sometimes you just get too proud, too arrogant, too important, too much of an idol, that other people look at. I'll lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. So some people do. I think that's a factor. Get to thinking they're so very important and above maybe the law or other people's behavior, or what's right. Well, MS Magazine had an article. I didn't write down who wrote it, but I'll just say it's from that magazine. They had an article. I won't read a lot of these statistics. I think we know the basic picture. But the American Psychological Association released a report called The Sexualization of Girls. 95% of those with eating disorders are between the age of 12 and 25. Women are much more likely than men to develop an eating disorder. Only an estimated 5 to 15% of people with anorexia or bulimia are men. Not the men dealing with that. More the ladies, because it had to do with appearance in many respects. Approximately 91% of the women are unhappy with their bodies and resort to dieting to achieve their ideal body shape. The way in which women are commonly portrayed in music videos, films, and advertising is not just disrespectful and sexist, it's at the root of a mental health crisis. The portrayal of the female, half the way they're portrayed, often, not in so much of a respectful manner, but as the article points out. So it says, while sex is certainly an important part of life, all things should be in moderation. We would say all within the definition of God's standard and character and what we are to become as human beings in our own life in the image of God. Doesn't make it easy, you know that. But while sex is certainly an important part of life, all things should be in moderation. Not everything in life should be viewed through the filter of sex. How can you escape that anymore? It seems like you can't buy an automobile. You can't buy a baseball glove. You can't buy anything without some kind of a female image selling it, promoting it. Not everything in life should be viewed through the filter of sex. Our hyper-sexualized culture turns women into objects for the consumption of the male gaze. And children do not often have a period of innocence in their lives before they're subjected to what their body has to offer. And so they're viewed that way, as their body. And other people, do things. Well, what gives you the right to do? Well, it's kind of programmed in some respects. One article mentioned that we're having more of a growth today in our society of not restaurants, they're calling them breastraunts. Breastraunts, because you know what they're promoting, and you know who's doing the serving and what they're highlighting. Hooters is kind of noted for that, but there's all kinds of chains. Same kind of theme, called breastraunts. Describes it very well. Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 16. Isaiah 3:16. God says, moreover, the Lord says, Isaiah 3:16, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, walk with stretched forth necks, wanton eyes. So there's an attitude. The way someone's projecting themselves, in this case, the ladies. Stretched forth neck, wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, making tingling with their feet, draw attention to themselves, their appearance, their shape, their body. Modesty, that's a blemish. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to be that way? It's a blemish. It's a character flaw. If you felt like you believed in modesty, what's the matter with you? Afraid of your body or something? So it's turned upside down in many respects. But, as is always the case, we can say society then often goes to the other extreme in trying to maybe solve a problem or address the problem, and there's no judgment. And I think it was somebody on the news recently, he got himself in trouble, and he was saying, well, yeah, it was years ago, there was some poor gal or lady, was upset, and he was consoling her, or, kind of maybe a hug or something, happened to touch a bare part of her arm or shoulder. That was sexual abuse. He's in all kinds of hot water, and didn't intend that at all. And so you can hardly say, well, that's a nice dress. You better not say that. Well, your hair certainly looks nice today. Better not say it. You ask a girl on a date once, okay, you asked and you went. You ask her twice, that's harassment. Don't do that. So it's like now, in many respects, how do you even know it? The best thing, don't look one way or the other. Stay to yourself. Don't say anything. And what kind of society is that? Well, we can't make any judgments. Okay, what was the intent? What was going on? What do you think we can't do that. You touched me. It's the end of that. It takes care of that. So we've got that going on as well, and that creates another problem. Well, as a church, I'll say this, as a church, we have to be aware of our examples to ourselves and others. Be aware of the world in which we live, and the example to others and to ourselves as well. What we say in conversation, how we greet each other, our choice of humor, how we dance, how we interact with each other's husbands and wives. We are all brethren, but there's still things to be aware of and to use good judgment. We don't want to go to either extreme. We don't need to be at either extreme, one way or the other. Just proper decorum and respect and the right kind of example to ourselves and to others. Well, as I mentioned, the entire sermon is not all about that. I really wanted to go into something that ties into that, but doesn't deal with it exclusively. That's found in Matthew chapter 6, verse 13. And I've not covered this specific topic, so I'll do it for the remaining time here this afternoon with that introduction because of what's taking place all around us in society. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 13, Jesus teaching his disciples to pray. Of all the different things he could have said, he said, pray, lead us not into temptation. Lead us not into temptation. So let's cover that for the remaining time, obviously tying into what we've covered so far, but not limited to that. Is everyone tempted? Is it a sin to be tempted? Well, what is Jesus saying here? Pray to your Father, lead us not into temptation. Why would you pray that? Why wouldn't you be strong enough to say, go ahead, lead me. I can deal with it. I don't have to worry about that. And that's not very good advice. That wouldn't be a very good approach. Well, obviously, it's a prayer for protection and safety. To pray to avoid unexpected temptations, that you would find yourself in the midst of a set of circumstances that you would find being tempting to you. Steer me away from that. I don't need that. I don't want to find myself in the middle of that. Lead me away from that. Watch over, protect me. Not going to go through life without any temptations, but a prayer for God's help and protection. Help me so I'm not inclined to yield to whatever the temptation might be. Remember the Matthew 26:41. Jesus talking to his disciples. Here, the final evening of his arrest. He said, let me give you some advice. Matthew 26:41. Watch and pray. Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. Pray that you don't find yourself in a circumstance that you're really not going to handle very well. You're going to get overwhelmed by that. Your spirit might be willing. I know, you don't want to do something bad. Your spirit's willing to do the right thing, but not everybody can handle everything all the time. None of us can, actually. The flesh is weak. All of a sudden, the good intentions in certain set of circumstances, what happened to them? Well, they all seem to dissipate in our lives at times. Well, what do we have happening? Peter enters into the courtyard. When they take Jesus away, they arrest him. He enters into the courtyard with the Jews and the Romans. And he'd have been better off not going there. Been better off saying, I don't need to get over there. I don't need to see everything. I'll be better off not even going there. What happens? Denies Christ. That's what happened. Got under that pressure of them accusing him, saying, you're one of the disciples. He didn't know you're not, and he cursed. Jesus said he'd been better off praying. And they thought, well, why do we need to pray about that? And we're all right here. Better off not finding yourself in that spot. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 5. 1 Thessalonians 3 and verse 5. First Thessalonians 3:5. Now, for this reason, when I could no longer, I couldn't forbear anymore. I really needed to know. I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and your labor be in vain. Heard about the tempter in the sermonette. He's called a tempter. He likes to tempt with the world, with circumstances, with a certain spirit, provocative spirit, a luring spirit, whatever it might be, that appeals to us, draws us to things, appeals to our fascination and desires. He's good at that. He's a tempter. Find ourselves being tempted. He said, I was afraid if by some means the tempter might have succeeded in tempting you. So Satan wants us tempted with all kinds of evil. Doesn't have to be what we talked about to begin with, all kinds. He tempted Jesus, led him into the wilderness to be tempted. Was it only one thing? What did Satan tempt Jesus with? Well, I'll find you a young gal about your age. If you fall down and worship me. He didn't say that. He appealed to the three primary things, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and pride of life. He did appeal to that. So it's not only one thing. He was led into the wilderness to be tempted. Hebrews 4 and verse 15. Hebrews 4:15. We don't have a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, though he didn't know what we're talking about. Being tempted to steal something, maybe. Being tempted not to tell the truth. What is he doesn't know anything about. No, he can be touched with the feelings of our infirmity. He was in all points tempted like as we are, in principle. The things that appeal to a human being. He knows what that's like. Yet without sin. So he understands that. He was tempted. Being tempted or being presented with something that is tempting is not sin and of and by itself. That basically is what we all find ourselves faced with. So how does it work? James 1, verse 13 and 14. How does it end up working? So we're to say in James 1, 13 and 14, don't let anybody try to tell themselves when they're tempted that God's tempting them. God doesn't do that. Here, go sin. Here, try get into trouble here. Take that. It doesn't belong to you. Disobey your parents. Steal on the job. God doesn't do that. He doesn't try to tempt us. So nobody's to say when he's tempted, I'm tempted of God. God can't be tempted with evil. Way above that. Neither tempts he any man. Every man's tempted when he's drawn away of his own desire. Of course, Satan's promoting that in this world and society and the spirit that's all the spirit of this world. But we're drawn away by what we're attracted to. That's where it is. That's what happens. And enticed by that. And then if you follow along, eventually it takes you somewhere that you're sorry you went. Well, let's wrap up the next few moments with common temptations. What would they be? What are common temptations? There'd be a lot of them. I think I only have 3 or 4. Wealth. 1 Timothy 6, verse 10. Wealth. 1 Timothy 6:10. The love of money. Who doesn't love money? Who wouldn't want to be rich? Who wouldn't want to find a bunch of money somewhere? The love of money is a root of any evil. Think of the evil. Anybody ever killed anybody for an inheritance? Anybody ever killed anybody trying to rob them? Think of an evil. You'll do it for money. Didn't they betray Jesus? And then they hire false witnesses, paid them. Love of money, root of all evil. People do anything for the right amount of money. Be wealthy, have no worries, buy anything you want, not worry about it. Love of money is the root of all evil, which some have coveted after. They've erred from the faith, pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Sounds like some in the church, associated with the church, followed after something that promised them a lot of money. Too bad. There was a temptation. It's a sign of our times, isn't it? All the casinos you find around, the lotteries, sweepstakes, the internet poker and gambling, and who knows what other games. Stock speculation can be that way. The millionaire game shows. Some get rich quick schemes. And it's easy to be taken, probably we'll double your money, we'll do this, you'll get this return, and you'll get this much money, and that sounds good. I think we'll follow after that. It's easy to be tempted with that, not use good judgment. Nothing wrong with it if we do it the right way. What's another common temptation? Pride and vainglory. What will some lady, men too, maybe it affects ladies more, at least in the Hollywood environment. What will some women be willing to do to be a star? Think about it. Be a star on the big screen. Everybody knows who you are. You're in the magazines, and you have an entourage. Famous. What are you willing to do for that? A lot of people, to have that, to be famous, to be rich, why not? It's worth it. So that gets offered. Apparently, we've heard about that. Make you a star. Apparently, a number have decided that would be the way to attain that. Pride and vainglory. Get recognized in business. Recognized in the community in some way. Be somebody in this world. Temptation. You're known, your name. Jesus said no if it meant compromise. Not worried about this world and what fame I have now. Wasn't worried about that. It's fine if we achieve things the right way. It's good to be noted, be honored. That's good. That's fine. Not a bad thing to want. The right way. That can be very much of a temptation. The money, the wealth, the pride, the vainglory, recognition. And of course, obviously what we mentioned in the first part, the tempted by the opposite sex. Not even an evil, a companionship and a friend and a relationship. And then of course if you're on drugs or you're drinking, who uses right judgment then? Few. Nobody probably. Those projected images are everywhere in our culture, everywhere we go. Well, what do we need to do with this in mind? Obviously, I guess we'd have to say when Jesus said, I'll teach you to pray, lead us not into temptation, that would be one thing to do, a good thing to pray about and to mention. As long as he said to do that, be good. Why? You might save yourself some circumstances that you're glad you didn't face. Realize Satan tries to tempt us. He's a tempter. Things are going to be put into your mind. He does that. Realize we're tempted with things we like or crave. Some things aren't tempting at all to other people. Don't worry about it at all. But the next person, that might be very difficult. So we tend to be tempted with things that we really like or crave or think about. Another point, don't take the first dangerous step. Don't take the first dangerous step. Peter had been better off not following and not going into that courtyard with the Jews and the high priests and the Romans. I don't need to be there. I think I'll just go with the with the other fellows. Once in there, well then, now how do I get myself out of this? Not to either. There's some good advice about friends, about environment, where you're going, who you're with, choices you don't make those first steps, and it's a lot easier. And finally, final thought, help each other. We want to help each other that way, especially in this context of temptation. We're commanded in Scripture to bear one another's burdens and also not to cause someone to stumble. We're aware of that. And Jesus warned us about that, offending other people. Ladies have to be mindful of men and the makeup of the male, what things attract us. Ladies have to be mindful of men and what can be tempting, what they wear, being too flirtatious, too much touching, etc. We're aware of that. We want to create a problem, but also for the men, immodesty or thoughtfulness on behalf of somebody, whether in the church or out, doesn't absolve men of their responsibility. It doesn't make anything okay. Might make it harder. Everyone's held accountable. Everybody's held accountable. Not some excuse about what somebody else did. We try to help each other out that way, especially as young people, young adults, and everyone for that matter. Couple more verses, Proverbs 6:27. Proverbs 6:27. I mentioned with all of this in the news, thought it was good for us, well, to just come back and look at some of the things Scripture say, get ourselves oriented again, and make sure nothing in society is kind of changing our thinking. But keep up the good fight. We heard a moment ago. Proverbs 6:27 is basic wisdom. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? I think they had that on the news here a day or two ago. They have this show I've watched once or twice. It's Forged or something. It's working with metal and forging and shaping metal. Kind of interesting what those craftsmen can do. Somebody was apparently somewhere doing his own work, and he's not an expert, didn't know he's to burn the whole building down. Whole building burned down. He was trying to imitate something he saw on the show with fire and flame and all that other. So can somebody take fire in his bosom, his clothes not be burned? So we're to be alert to temptation. It's a part of being a successful Christian. We're alert to that. We're cognizant of that. We're cognizant of the difference in male and female and the parameters and the space and the respect of that. Try to promote that in our activities. It says, for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. So we have to model Christian ethics and standards in the midst of this present world. What a chore. What a challenge. Model the right principles and values and standards in the midst of something that's being pumped out all the time. All those images, all those... No wonder people are making choices. You think, what were they thinking? Pretty much what they've been led to think in so many ways. Okay, I'll conclude with James chapter 1, verse 12. James 1 and verse 12. Here's what God tells you. He realizes the world in which we live. So he says, blessed in James 1 and verse 12, so blessed is the man or the woman that endures temptation. For when he's tried, he shall receive a crown of life, which the Lord has promised to them that love him. It's a part of the Christian life, part of the challenge, enduring temptation. But as James says, he'll receive a crown of life, which the Lord has promised to them that love him.